Oh yeah, okay. I don't see anything though. It appears to be, yes, okay, it's working. We're
All
live.
right. We are live indeed.
Awesome. Okay, I'm gonna jump into it, yeah?
Let's do it.
Okay, everybody, hi again. It's Balach over here, and myself, Waylene. Today we're gonna talk about a hot topic for everybody, the most controversial topic of all, more so than politics, and more so than God. That
Steak
is
or beans?
steak or beans. Yes, thank you. That great. I'm gonna put that in the title. So you can be healthy eating different ways, right? I learned about Rip Esselstyn, a vegan triathlete and advocate for veganism. He's amazing. He led the way for many people to follow in his footsteps. And on the other extreme, several MMA fighters, I can name Chad Mendes, who claimed that the carnivore diet helped his psoriasis. I think I pronounced that correctly. And another lady called female MMA fighter Alejandra Lara, and she credited the diet with her health improvements as well. So just right off the bat, I want to say that because I want to make it clear that we are capable, as human beings, we are capable of flexibility and variety in our diet. And we can be not just, surviving, we can thrive, we can be elite athletes, eating whichever way we choose. Now, however, we're here today to have a how do you call it, a face-off between steak or beans. Yes. So, because everything in life comes with trade-offs, and we're here to understand these trade-offs, and to do so, Balach and I will be presenting our cases. I will be on the side of beans, vegetarianism specifically, not veganism today, and Balach will be taking the side of the steaks. Yes.
I'm going to give it my best.
Okay. And without further ado, Balach, please sip a coffee to brace yourself.
Indeed. So, just also to set context, this choice of roles is interesting because I've been a vegetarian for a long time, and we can get into that as well as I do all sorts of sports, right? So, it's a great intro to start talking about mixed martial arts. So, having been a vegetarian, to think about why meat consumption can be good for you or is good for you is a very interesting topic for me. The way I approached this research going into today's session was I thought, well, let's break it down into what kind of arguments do I hear, right, and on my side of the camp. And by the way, I'm not an activist for veganism or vegetarianism, but I have clear preferences. So that aside, one of the big things I often hear is when people talk about the dietary needs, right? There's this big argument that vegetarians miss out on certain things that a carnivorous diet provides. Another argument you hear sometimes is people talking about diseases that vegetarians might be more prone to because of their diet, or meat eaters might have an advantage, or vice versa. I tried to think a bit about also food combinations. I also came upon a new aspect that I didn't think of before, which was a kind of racial or group adaptations. And then the latest thing that kind of is a bit more not fully baked in my mind is just general evolution of our diets and how we live in our societies. So trying to put all of these things together, my approach was to look at blue zone diets. So blue zones, for those who are not aware, there's a few places on Earth that are considered to be kind of particularly interesting and special for people looking at diets and their impacts on longevity and general health. And so Sardinia in Italy is this island sub-nation that is one of the blue zones of this world, where you have the biggest population of centenarians. and you have people living into their hundreds or reaching 100 years old age. Then you have Okinawa in Japan, another island kind of subnation, let's call it, whatever the appropriate way of calling it. I do not want to get into that, but there's a distinct group of people who lives on these Okinawan islands, and they have distinct diet that seems to help them. You have the highest population of centenarians there as well in the world. There's the Greek island of Ikaria, which is another one. And so you have some of these places that have particular diets that have more or less been stable for hundreds of years, and people seem to live long, and they seem to live healthy there. Then I also try to look at some very niche groups, so Inuits and Maasai in particular, who often get dragged into these arguments and discussions about what kind of food is good for you. I didn't find much literature on Mongolia and Siberia, because in Siberia you also have tribes and groups of people who have seemingly meat-heavy diets, and apparently they seem to be doing well. I didn't get a lot of content on that, so I'll probably not go into too much of that. Now, the interesting thing about these 3 blue zones that I mentioned, Okinawa, Sardinia, the Greek island of Ikaria, is that their food definitely contains meat. So if you know Italian food, you have all sorts of pasta sauces that come with meat. You have pizzas that come with meat. There's also a lot of carbohydrates. There's all sorts of other things involved as well. If you think of Okinawa, you think different forms of sushi, perhaps more traditional forms of essentially seafood. And same with Ikaria. It's an island nation. You have a lot of seafood. You do have meat. What is interesting about all of these is, one, that there's meat, and two, in general, that meat seems to be coming from local sources. So it's not your meat bought at supermarket, but it is from farmers, locally produced, generally healthy meat. And these guys don't seem to suffer any bad consequences of that. So the thing that I learned from this part of the research was that having meat in your diet doesn't necessarily put you at a disadvantage, right? So straight up confession, as a vegetarian, I'm not saying at all. In fact, I'm convinced that having meat in your diet is not bad for you. As some people might try to convince you to go all vegan or only vegetarian, and that meat is the source of all evil. I don't think that is the case. And also historically, if you look at the history of the world, we know that we have been hunter-gatherers, we have been scavengers, we have had meat in our diets. And even our closest cousins, chimpanzees, or things like that, apes, gorillas, they have a dominantly vegetarian diet, but then they do eat ants here and there, and they do get some of their nutrition needs met from animal sources. So that was the first simple conclusion that I came to. One, meat is not all bad. It's okay. So then the question was, kind of, I got a green tick on it's okay to be an omnivore. And so then the question was, what about just being carnivore, or just going on a paleo diet, or really only eating meat? And what I got on that was essentially, I'll just summarize it. I might show some tabs that I have open here as well. But essentially the summary of that comes down to certain diets, whether they're meat heavy or non-meat heavy, can have very positive impacts if you are aiming for certain goals. If you are suffering from certain diseases, changing that diet to let's say more or less a singular focus tends to be helpful. So as Vedin mentioned, you have some MMA athletes saying switching to a carnivore diet has helped them tremendously and improved their performance, and they feel good. And, people get into all sorts of biomarkers and things like that seem to be showing healthy responses. I think that's very much possible. The opposite is also true, by the way. You have, for example, this thing called Gerson diet, which is a diet, according to its proponents, helps cure cancer. It is largely fruitarian. But personally, I don't think you can just completely live off a fruitarian diet either. It might be good for certain periods of time if that is what your body needs. So that's the conclusion on meat-only diets for me, that it can be good for a certain period of time, or for sure tends to be. Like, there's enough anecdotal evidence, there's some studies that help that as well. So that was the other thing. Now, going back to the blue zones, there was a question of how meat heavy are these diets, right? Is meat the contributing factor for the longevity and the health of these people?
That's a different question, isn't it?
Yeah. So if I was to advocate for meat, right, that would be the question I would like to answer. If I think if people are living long and healthy, and if they're eating predominantly meat, I mean, that kind of answers my personal question of, am I going to be okay on my vegetarian diet, or should I start including some meat, or somebody thinking along those lines? So I started looking into this, and one of the population that people often present is the Inuit, and the other one is the Maasai population. So Maasai men tend to eat more meat than women. They tend to have a fair amount of meat, or that's what we are told in their diets. And the Inuits have a lot of seafood, or seal and whale meat in their diet. And there were some studies from the early 50s that kind of indicated, the old style researchers who would say, I was there for 3 weeks and I saw these people eating all this meat and they were great. They were in great health. The meat did not seem to lead to any diseases in them, and they seemed to be doing well. What I found out later was, for example, I'm gonna share this link with Velin now first, and I will also share my screen. So let's see, window, and I'm jumping into this window. I hope you guys can see this. Let's give it a second to show up on the screen.
It's loading.
It's still loading.
Yeah. Okay.
And here we go. So the first sentence here is kind of well known to consume significant amounts of whale and seal meat frequently. The Inuit are commonly construed to be heart disease free. This was one of the big conclusions from one of this early studies, and people mentioned that quite a bit. Now the question is this an outlier? There's also other observational research finding that low processed food, low animal and high plant diets to be associated with low heart disease death rates. Now, what was interesting here was that what we do know that Inuits eat a relatively lower carbohydrate diet and relatively higher meat diet. I'm just going to skip over some of these things and jumping to what about their risk of heart disease. Now, what this article says that this myth is so often repeated that it just became an unsupported truth. So there was a recent paper in 2003 relative to 1950s, which looked at autopsy studies and clinical observations and studies that actually proved that heart disease does exist among the Inuit. As you would imagine, I think heart disease has existed for a long time. It may not have been documented. What was interesting that kind of heart disease does exist. That was one thing. The other thing was that bone health among the Inuits was quite bad. So aging bone loss, which occurs in many populations, has an early onset and greater intensity in the Inuit community, and nutritional factors of high protein, high nitrogen, high phosphorus, and low calcium intake may be implicated. Now, there was something else here. So something must be going on, right? So you have a high meat diet. People generally seem to be healthy. What's going on? And there's heart disease, and apparently that diet is implicated in that. So I'm not gonna, since I'm not making the case for vegetarianism, I'm making the case for meat is okay. So how were these people still relatively healthy? Here's the other one. I hope you can see this one. Let me jump. Is this the correct one? This one. So here's a more newer study which showed high-fat diet made Inuits healthier but shorter, thanks to gene mutations. So this was the kind of data that was not available to us in the past. So this question of, is meat generally good for you, or was there something else going on? And this was the study showed that actually, and let me just jump straight here. People with genetic mutations that help them efficiently digest the food available are more likely to survive and have healthy children, who will themselves also inherit this capacity through their genes. And this would make sense, right? So if your diet is only meat, but you have a mutation that helps you work with that better, then of course it's good for you. So this new study analyzed genetic diversity in 191 people with indigenous Greenlandic Inuit ancestry, and then they compared their genomes with those from 60 people from Europe and 44 from East Asia. And they looked at specific genetic markers previously found to be associated with heart disease and metabolic disorders, and identified a cluster of genes that had undergone a lot of changes in Greenlandic Inuits compared to the two other populations. And these are these two genes which encode enzymes FADS1, FADS2, and FADS3, which determine the level of polyunsaturated fats. Now, I'm just going to jump to essentially here. The study authors speculated that the reduced amount of fatty acid in the Inuit population could compensate for the high dietary intake of omega-3, a type of polyunsaturated fatty acid, through fish and seafood. So there's a bit more about the impact on height and so on. But this kind of answered to me this question of it is possible that certain populations have adapted over time to be able to essentially thrive off fat and meat diets. So kind of not necessarily that it's blanket good for you, but that, yes, it can be good for you. It's also not blanket bad for you. So this was interesting. There was some other data on Maasai as well. So Maasai eat relatively more meat, but they tend to have shorter lifespans compared to the rest of the population. Kind of Maasai living into their 60s and 70s is a relative rarity. So kind of trying to put these two together, I'll repeat again, it's not that meat is blanket good or blanket bad for you. My conclusion was that if you have certain adaptations, as is the case now we know with the Inuits, actually you can be in a way more adapted to a relatively more carnivorous diet, and that it would work for you. Then there were some, going back to the, let me just see, let's go to Sardinian dietary analysis. What is happening there? So there was something, if I can find the right amounts, contrary to my expectation, the Sardinian diet is not meat heavy, but it's kind of almost around 25 to 30% of the caloric intake comes from meat. But there's a significant other 75% that comes from carbohydrates, sugars, legumes, etc. Let me see. Sardinian diet, Gerson diet, etc. Meat versus vegetable proteins. Okay, I'll start wrapping this up a bit because then we can go into more details and different aspects. So racial adaptation can help. Food combination is definitely a factor that we cannot take away. There was some evidence that a carnivorous diet can lead to colon cancer, or colon cancer is more visible or seen in people who are on a much more carnivorous diet. But I don't think that is so clear-cut yet. So for me, to put it kind of all together, the conclusion basically was what I already said a bunch of times now. Meat is okay, especially, in fact, meat is great if you are from a population that has adapted to eating meat. I think a more omnivorous diet is better than just a carnivorous diet. And then from a personal point of view, my conclusion at the end of the day was that, well, I'm pro-choice. If you choose to eat meat, eat meat. I don't think I have enough basis to say that it's bad for you in any way. As a vegetarian, personally, I wouldn't recommend it. But I would leave some more things, like from my personal point of view. So this research did not make me change my mind on. It's not that tomorrow I'm going to start eating meat because it's great. It seems to be good enough. It's useful. Nothing against it. The things that I do have against it, I'm going to save for later when we get into a discussion, because it's an important part of my life. So I do want to discuss those aspects as well. But for the presentation on should you eat meat or should you not eat meat, please, by all means, go ahead if that's what tickles your fancy and makes you feel great. I do accept the anecdotal evidence. That it may be that you're an athlete and due to your genetic composition or your circumstances or the kind of workload and protein needs you have, it might be a good choice for you. So go for it. There was something also I wanted to add, kind of the bioavailability of meat. So proteins from animal sources seem like they are more readily absorbed than from non-protein sources. And so that might work in your favor as well, if that is the goal you have, to consume as much protein as you can. A high protein diet seems to be healthy in terms of not kind of running around with a lot of fat reserves around your body. If that is the goal, go for it. I think that would be a good point to cut and hand over to Vedin to see what Vedin found out. That's where I will stop.
All right, thanks, Balach. So it sounds like what I took away was that there are populations that are adapted to eating meat, but you said that the Inuit, it sounded like they had pretty poor health from what you were saying, and Maasai as well. So I don't really understand who is the ones with the adaptation and what is the benefit. There doesn't appear to be benefit to it.
No, so the thing with these two is that they seem to generally live healthy for as long as they live. They don't seem to have any benefits of longevity. So they don't live as long, but for as long as they live, they seem to be living healthily. And how do they define it? It's that they remain active in their lives. Masai actually have a huge amount of visible activity. They walk a lot. There are some studies that suggest that on average it's kind of like they have the equivalent of walking 20 kilometers a day, which is huge, right, compared to most modern humans, and especially those of us living in cities and working with computers. And their meat intake doesn't seem to negatively impact that. They have found also from these autopsy studies in Inuits and Maasai as well, is that they do have buildup of these fats around their coronary arteries, but their arteries are also adapted and slightly bigger in size, so they're not getting heart attacks from eating too much meat and fat that then builds up in their arteries, but there is a buildup. So that's the thing. They eat meat. They seem very healthy. They just don't seem to live long, but that's not necessarily due to their meat intake. So to be very clear,
Kills them then.
could be any number of factors. That's the part of research I didn't go into. Inuits tend to live in very harsh conditions. I mean, in like minus 40, minus 50 degrees centigrades in winter, higher with wind chill. Maasai live on the land. If you're walking barefoot on the land, you could have snake bites. You could have thorns that turn into gangrenes. That there could be poisoning from different foods as well. Maasai have an interesting practice. Young males there's this ritual more or less once a year. They go out and they live for 2 weeks and they eat mainly meat in those 2 weeks. So red meats, blood, other organs, etc. There's not that much research on it. They tend to develop at least acute symptoms of kind of food poisoning because of that. But it doesn't seem to have, or at least there's no studies that would show that there's a long-term negative impact. There's a short-term negative impact, which would be understandable. If you eat, I don't know, bread for 2 weeks straight, you will probably have gastrointestinal issues as well. So that seemed just kind of local impact of that very particular carnivore diet for 2 weeks straight for somebody who's not 100% carnivore all the time. So again, nothing, no minus points for meat there. It's just that part of the ritual. And the shorter lifespan, no, can't say much about that.
But it's not heart disease that kills them. It's something else.
No. So that they did not find. Like I said, they found this buildup of fats around their arteries, but it was not that killed them.
It's really it's a bit odd that they tell you that okay, it's not heart disease, and they tell, but we did find this arterial plaque, and they do die. They do die young. They die young, and they have arterial plaque, but it's not heart disease.
Yeah.
And they conveniently left out the part where they're supposed to tell you, okay, this is what actually kills them. So just so you know, because they have this what looks like pretty extreme diet, and everybody really want to know. So what does it do to them? What is it? How did they die? They die of old age? They die of old age at like 35 or 45 or what is it? It's odd, like. Yeah, man, you're not doing it.
No. I mean, sometimes we don't have enough data, right? And this is where speculation comes into the picture. So one of the interesting things I learned, not in this research but from before, is that we have often micro heart attacks. So in periods of high exertion or sudden exertion, a lot of us normal people, we suffer micro heart attacks that then are recovered from, and we are none the wiser. It doesn't show up anywhere. So not total heart failure from buildup of plaque or sudden blow to the chest or something like that. And I'm just now wildly speculating that Masai, with some of their extreme, also in some of their rituals, they're just tall dudes standing and jumping high. I mean, that has an impact. And it could be that some of them do die because of the buildup combined with that one ritual, combined with another ritual. There could be freak accidents. There could be other things that are happening. We don't know. I think what I want to emphasize is, I'm trying not to fill the gaps where we don't know. And if I'm going to speculate, I say it out loud clearly, because I think, we have this tendency of wanting sure answers. And oh boy, would I love to have clear answers of, okay, what exactly is going on with the Maasai and
The
Inuits?
Maasai people are really interesting. While you were presenting, I did a quick Google and CNN. I found an article on CNN that says the leading causes of death for the Maasai are pneumonia and diarrhea, for which 2 vaccines were introduced nationally in 2013. So they obviously they're dying of seems like very preventable diseases, pneumonia and diarrhea. That's just
Yeah.
awful.
Yeah.
You can't get them stuff to deal with pneumonia and diarrhea in the 21st century.
Yeah, I mean, we are, as human beings, we're very interesting, right? For example, you have a lot of deaths. Every time there's a cholera outbreak in India, there's a lot of deaths, and that's the biggest cause for that is general dysentery, lack of hygiene in the environment of those people. And so, can you point a finger then at their diet, or can you point a finger at lack of activity or other things? It's a bit harder one. So this is the world we live in. People die of all sorts of preventable causes.
Yeah. Also, did you see the photos of the Maasai?
I've seen some of the photos of the Maasai, yes.
They're like not fat.
No, I mean, if you're walking the equivalent of 20
also,
kilometers a day,
get super fat, like eating all that meat, and stuff.
no, it's interesting. I think one thing that has to be added is, oftentimes people say, oh, all the fats that you get from it, and well, if you combine it with a huge amount of activity, that is not necessarily we have all seen pictures of tall Maasai men jumping 4 feet straight into the air, right? Not bending their knees, and we think how bad must that be for their knees? And it's like, yeah, but they don't do it all the time.
Women are not fat too.
Yeah, well, they're all walking and working all the time, and that's the interesting thing also for the Okinawan and Sardinian people. These centenarians, I mean, they are active in their societies throughout their life. It's not that they look good and healthy till 60s and then they have a long period in old age homes. They're active all the time, so they're processing a lot of. Perhaps, let's say, even if they were eating unhealthily, they're processing a lot of that out of their systems. And that means despite high-fat diets, they don't look fat.
Yeah, they look amazing. Yeah, these are the jumping folks that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Kind of the famous pictures, right? But it's not that they're jumping like this every day, all day long. You also have pictures of Maasai men running when they're hunting, but they're not hunting literally every day. They have some very interesting peculiarities. The link that I just shared has some images of the meat when they're on their meat retreat, let's call it. And that's for a vegetarian, it looks kind of almost grotesque, but it's okay. It's within a certain time frame. They have their rituals. They don't seem to develop long-term issues because of that. There are some short-term impacts. Like I said, with anything else, you could get those. It's an interesting population.
So if they go on these 4-week long health refuge, and that half the Maasai men develop metabolic disorders that are what precursor to diabetes, why is it that they don't seem to get diabetes? You die from pneumonia and stuff, and diarrhea.
Yeah, there's a sentence in that link that I shared, which is there's this associate professor at University of Copenhagen, Dirk Lund Christensen, who's been studying the health of the Maasai for the past 15 years. And his hypothesis is that the risk of diabetes and cardiovascular disease is reduced as dietary intake changes over a year due to changing seasons. So you have 2 seasons with rain and 2 seasons with or without or with limited rain. So one of the other interesting aspect is that compared to what we eat, they have in a way they have a caloric restriction. They're eating seemingly less than what they should be eating. I think later we can get into what that really means. Is 3,000 calories the need across the population, across the world, and also the impact of caloric restriction. I mean, by now we have all heard about intermittent fasting and how healthy that is for human beings. So in a way, they kind of have natural periods of fasting, you could say. So there is kind of recovery built into the overall, let's say, seasonal intake of the food as well. So there may be kind of, let's say, their bad habits are accounted for in some way.
Right. Yeah, the Maasai are really one of a kind, and thanks for sharing that. And if I may, I just want to share something I looked up very briefly while you were presenting. I just did a quick Google search. There's this really old article, Studies of Nutrition, the Physique. So this was, I think, written in 1931. I think that's really nice because as we studied these different tribes, I think one of the known issues that occur is that there are more and more of these, the Inuit and the Maasai, more and more adapting modern diets, modern lifestyles, and that pollutes the data. So the older research that we have becomes more valuable from that context, because that will come from a time prior to the introduction of modern diets. So let's skim this real quick. It's just the abstract. So in 1931, there was a researcher named Orb. It says here, this report contains the most interesting and valuable account of the influence of nutrition and physical condition of 2 tribes, the Maasai and the Akikuyu. The 2 tribes vary markedly in their diet, the main one being carnivorous, and the other is vegetarian, and just as markedly in their physique. The full-grown male Maasai is on the average 5 inches taller, 23 pounds heavier, and with muscular strength some 50% greater than the full-grown male Kikuyu. The Maasai live for the most part on a diet with high content of protein, fat, and calcium. It's odd. So even in 1931, the researcher noted that they eat high protein, fat, and calcium, whereas the modern researcher noted that they had low calcium, was it? I think. Whereas the Kikuyu diet is rich in carbohydrates and relatively poor in calcium. Marked differences were also noted in the incidence of disease. The diseases common to the Kikuyu are bony deformities, dental caries, anemia, pulmonary conditions, and ulcers. Whereas in the Maasai, rheumatoid arthritis and intestinal stasis. I think this is such a mark of an old article. I don't even know what intestinal stasis means. But that is interesting. Kikuyu also infested with intestinal parasites. The women of the tribe, who have on the whole a better diet than the men, seem to suffer less from these parasites. The details supplied with reference to diets are most interesting. In the case of the Kikuyu, differences were found in the nature of the food consumed by the men and women. The male diet consisted mainly of maize or millet, so corn or millet, whatever that is, or sweet potatoes. Whereas the females, while consuming the same staple, added more quantities of legumes and plantains and more of a use a considerable addition of green leaves. Right? So they probably got more protein out of the legumes. Common addition to the diet, for the women especially, was earth from salt licks. So they were getting more salt, which were also found to be rich in iron. So that's pretty interesting. They even broke it down into male and female. The Maasai diet of the warrior class consisted mainly of meat, milk, and raw blood. Apparently under normal conditions, except when hunting, they consume a certain amount of berries. The warrior class eat almost no vegetables. The rest of the Maasai consume a certain amount, when available, of bananas, beans, millet, maize, etc. So apparently, so it's warriors who are eating mostly meat, and the non-warriors do eat some amount of bananas, beans, millet, and so on. Although I think it appears that in this abstract that the conclusions and the observations are generalized still. They say generally the Maasai health appears to be better. More detailed study of the nutritional state of natives was made by the investigators of hospital cases and of prisoners. In both cases, the food is ample as regards to energy and protein. Percentage of phosphorus would also seem to be adequate, but according to the standards of Sherman, the calcium was deficient. Various experimental additions consisting of mineral mixtures with or without cod liver oil were given to these basal diets, and the body weight of the test subjects went up slightly in all groups, but without any outstanding difference. There was a rise in the blood calcium in all groups, and the retention was highest in the mineral plus cod liver oil group, understandably. Observations on the growing boys, we're almost coming to the end, were also made. The growing boys thing, I think, is more interesting. The milk supplement was given, and that gave the best results, both as regards the increase in the body weight and the retention of calcium. Some interesting observations also made at a reformatory. So that was pretty interesting. Seems that they maybe need more calcium, and that may have led to, I can imagine, right, I made the connection that there was a calcium deficiency, and then the boys give them milk rich in calcium, and then they showed the best increase in body weight, like better growth. Special attention was devoted to the incidence of tropical ulcer, particularly in relation to 140 of the patients studied. That's quite a number for tribal study. I think it doesn't sound like it would be that many. Tropical ulcer is more prevalent among the Kikuyu, and the difference maker seemed to be the inorganic phosphorus in the ulcer cases. So I think it's a lack of phosphorus that led to the ulcers, and the Kikuyu were certainly more afflicted. Okay. So that is pretty interesting. Turned out that in 1931 they had what's this, Professor Orr already had the idea to compare these tribes that lived in generally the same area, and I think we'll put this in I'll put this in the show notes for everyone to look at.
Yeah, absolutely. I think these studies are also interesting, not just from a dietary perspective, but there's two things that come to my mind which we can go into detail later on as well. One is that a more detailed study on prisoners and hospital cases, right? So that can also easily skew the results. If you're observing people under certain conditions, these might be people already deficient or out of context in a way. And I don't know how much of that it was. And the further back in history we go, the less kind of double-blind studies we find. The other thing of people seem to be deficient in calcium, and supplementing that with milk seems to help. I mean, that makes sense. Now the question is, how much calcium did they need, and which standard are we checking it against? Is it the standard of the European settlers? Maybe the locals were fine, and maybe that is a factor in terms of their longevity, for example. It might be that they seem to be doing well, but they hit a certain age where that calcium deficiency seemed to be the limiting factor. So these studies are very interesting in that sense. There's some general assumptions we can make out of that, some conclusions, and then also they put up some questions.
Yeah. Yes. Thanks, Balach. Yeah, so you're the Maasai master now. So I think we would look to you to inform us consequently of any follow-up studies, any difference in the populations, like we know whether it's the villagers or prisoners, and then what were the effects, if any, of the interventions with calcium. So leave it to you.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you very much for presenting that. I think really interesting. It led to me to look into this interesting 1931 study about the Maasai and the Kikuyu. In fact, let me just send you the link so you can look into it further if you're interested.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I'll just put one more here.
There's not a lot of free, studies floating around. That's why I think open access journals are so important. But that this at least gave a really nice, lengthy abstract. Yeah. Okay. So thank you for presenting the case for meat, which ultimately I don't feel convinced by, but.
Well, yeah, I don't either, but that's
I hope
that's
I can
what
convince you instead that vegetables are better.
Sure. let's
I
give it
know
a
that
try.
you will be very skeptical, but I will take your tough questioning head on. Yes. I hope
Let's
that I
see.
can use the carrot instead of the stick. The carrot literally to make my case.
Let's do it.
All right. So I don't really need to show a lot of screens, but let us begin. So the way I want to do this is I'm going to say that there are three arguments that are very strong for a vegetarian diet. Now, before that, as a preface to that, allow me to say that food allergies are increasingly common. And I think, just personal viewpoint, that they tell us something about humans. What is good for us, what is not good for us, what some of us and more of us are sensitive to, what we should avoid, what we should have more of. So turns out, yes, I looked up allergens, food allergens in children and adults. So let's just go through them real quick. I got this from Hopkins Medicine. Food allergens for children, the top food allergens are milk, eggs, peanuts, tree nuts, so all kinds of nuts, I presume, walnuts, cashew nuts, what have you, soy and wheat. Yeah. And these are for kids increasingly. So not a lot of people have food allergies. I think it's still in the single digit percentages, but these are the common ones that cause problems. And for adults, it is mostly the same: eggs, milk, peanuts, tree nuts, the same, fish and shellfish, wheat, soy, and sesame. And this I got from the American College of Allergies, Asthma, and Immunology. And these account for about 90% of all adult reactions. And this raises an interesting, this leads me to my first point, which is hormesis. Hormesis is the fancy scientific word for what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So there are things that plants contain that are not good for us. Like people with food allergies will know that, they have their allergies. Now, some of it's milk, and fish, shellfish, crustaceans, all that. Leaving that aside, common ones, peanuts, nuts, soy, wheat, and they can cause real problems for some people. And what other kinds of things can cause problems? Well, now I can show you screen. So on the Harvard School of Public Health, they have an article about something called anti-nutrients. Have you heard of that?
No, I have not.
Yeah, anti-nutrients are a really interesting thing. Let's see. Let's take a quick look here. The term anti-nutrients suggests what they are. Whereas nutrients are substances that nourish you, anti-nutrients block the absorption of nutrients. They are found naturally found in animals and many plant-based foods. In plants, they are compounds designed to protect from bacterial infections and being eaten by insects. I think they're being a little too narrow here. I think it's just to prevent themselves from being eaten. So these are some of the common ones. Glucosinolates in cruciferous vegetables, so broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, kale, and they can prevent the absorption of iodine. Lectins, which are in legumes, can interfere with the absorption of calcium, iron, phosphorus, and zinc. So anti-nutrients, oxalates in green leafy vegetables, beans, beets, then prevent calcium from being absorbed. Phytates decrease the absorption of iron, zinc, magnesium, calcium. Saponins interfere with normal nutrient absorption. Tannins in tea and coffee can decrease iron absorption. In fact, I've come across this factoid before that, if you drink a lot of coffee, you ought to, eat more iron because, the coffee will leach off some of it. For people who drink a lot of coffee, and I consider myself someone who drinks a lot of coffee, I think these things to know. Now, the point that I want to share, the takeaway here is that plants need evolve their own defense mechanisms. So animals can run away from predators, but plants cannot. So they have to evolve their defenses, right where they are. And that's well, I think that's why even among herbivores there are adaptations, right? Some animals can eat grass, and many others cannot. You can't eat grass, which is really tough. You may need to eat, young leaves, which are, good example, giraffes. Giraffes need to be eating the younger leaves that are more tender, high in the tree, because those close to the ground are too tough. They're less adapted to those. So plants have all kinds of defenses, and they cannot eat some of these things, right? Because you'll get a tummy ache, you'll actually lose nutrients. So it is not too much to imagine that it happens to some people. Now, on the plus side, history, normal life has shown us that most of the time we're fine with it. Which leads me to hormesis. In fact, some, like the cruciferous vegetables, which have these glucosinolates, yes, they can interfere with the absorption of iodine, but they do contain a chemical called sulforaphanes, which are wonderful. It's a substance. So here we have a very short, mercifully short abstract. It just says, evidence establishes that sulforaphane is a hormetic dietary isothiocyanate to be a promising chemopreventive, anti-inflammatory, anti-cancer agent. So it does so by stimulating your body to be stronger. Literally, what doesn't kill me makes me stronger.
Mm-hmm.
Now, beyond a certain concentration, the sulforaphane exerts pro-death activities. It's a really creative way to say it. Cell cycle arrest. So it'll arrest the progress of the cell cycle. It will modify, your the expression of your genes. So not literally modify your genes, but something epigenetics is about how the expression of your genes takes place. And apoptosis is cell death. So it can lead to these things, But below the threshold, it either promotes pro-survival autophagy or remains latent. And autophagy is exactly what people engage in intermittent fasting for. So autophagy, just to fill in, I'm sure Balach, you already heard this, that just your cells eating or cleaning away dead cells, or things that clearing out your system, your body, and sulforaphanes promote this. And you have to you eat some of it below a certain threshold, and it'll be really good for you. And the rest of it I won't go into because it's not that important to what I'm trying to say. That is, this is unique in the whole, in all of life. You have to turn to the cruciferous vegetables for this benefit. So that's my first point. I think it's a strong one, hormesis. So, and you only get this if you eat vegetables. You can't get this if you're the Maasai. Secondly would be mushrooms. So there was this for I think quite a lot of people watch the Joe Rogan podcast nowadays. He had on this mushroom professor. His name is Dr. Paul Stamets, and Dr. Stamets is a big advocate. This is his website. He talks about the benefits of mycelium. So I'll just give it flavor, a taste of what he talks about. So yeah, Paul Stamets' team partnered blah 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 to further clarify immune enhancing impacts of various mushroom ingredients. So essentially what he did was to culture some rice, putting some mycelium onto the rice and letting it grow. And what happened was that the processed or the cultured material increases the body's immune strength, loosely speaking, right? I mean, that's not what you would say in a science paper, but loosely speaking, that's what happened. So if you eat plain rice, you don't get any of these benefits. And if this certain kind of mushroom was applied to the rice, then it starts to become, chemically active and does these things for you. So again, this will be one of the things that, so in this case, he cultured the mushroom and then extracted, the active ingredients. So it's not just you eating the rice directly. There has to be, nature has to take its course, in which case then you get the benefits. So mushrooms are really special. Mushrooms are, in fact, I heard that mushrooms, are surprisingly related to us. They don't engage in photosynthesis at all. They're perfectly happy to grow in the dark, and they, in fact, we as human beings, we created penicillin derived from mushrooms, and that came from mushrooms. Mushrooms produce the chemical. So mushrooms are very good for us, not only when we eat them, but also from the chemicals that we can extract from them. Personally, I have four types of mushroom supplements in capsule form that I take pretty regularly, for mental alertness, and I find them to be quite effective, at least as good as a cup of coffee, maybe even better. And you definitely don't get jittery like you would with coffee. So you would not have access to all of these, benefits. You couldn't just, like eat a steak and get a mental boost. It's just not possible. That option does not exist, right? Of course, if you're someone who says, I'll take my capsules and I don't call them vegetables, well, then fine, you can define it flexibly. But this is the pro-vegetarian argument. And let's see, my third argument, and for this I don't need to share a screen, is that now I started off, before I get into that, I have to come back just a moment. Yeah, this popular internet doctor, Dr. X. So I know plenty of people are skeptical about your, internet doctors, or they have their own preferred internet doctor. No problem. Don't worry. This is just to give some, objective, or some introductory information about this very popular one, lion's mane mushroom, which I do have, yes, but I'm not selling it. So just to introduce, yeah, it looks kind of hairy, like a lion's mane, and yeah, it does, in fact, enhance brain function, benefit the nervous system. Um, you can find, oh yes, yes. So this, you can even find such information on the NIH, National Institute of Health, which is a pretty official website. And Hericium erinaceus, I'm sure I butchered that, so sorry, is the lion's mane mushroom. So they talk about it here. Yes, for nerve and brain health. There are some articles linked, some papers linked. Triggers neurite outgrowth, regeneration of damaged nerves. So really good, and indeed has to be mushrooms. So there you go. Third one that I want to mention is that, even just casually speaking here, I think I've already put the idea in everybody's head that there are some risks to eating vegetables, because everything comes with a risk, right? You eat red meat, some will tell you that you risk cancer, heart disease, and now previously people didn't know, but there are anti-nutrients in vegetables that negatively affect some people's bodies, right? We already know that some people can't eat wheat, but now we know additionally that there are things like oxalates and phytates and glucosinolates or something. They all serve a function, though. It's not just to drive animals away. I think, for instance, phytates are how plants store phosphorus, which is also important for their growth, just that they interfere with our body's absorption of zinc or iron or something like that. So knowing all these risks, when a person chooses nonetheless to stick to vegetables and say, I don't want to be responsible for deaths of any living animals, then I absolutely have to, right? Then I would commend that, and I would say, well, that is a moral choice, knowing full well the risks. Now, if somebody said, chose to say, I'm going to be vegetarian, vegetables are great. They have everything I need, and have no downsides whatsoever, then maybe one could point at them and say, perhaps you are not informed of the full picture. But if you're fully informed, you know that you choose to be a moral individual and you say, I want to save animals, and now I am aware of the risks of eating vegetables. Nonetheless, I choose to accept the risk and bear the risks because I'm willing to make sacrifices as a moral creature, as a moral being. Then I find that a lot more praiseworthy and respectable than the person who went into it without knowing the risks. So those are my three points. Yeah, hormesis, what doesn't kill me makes me stronger. Mushrooms, because they provide benefits that are uniquely only available among mushrooms, and the concept of the ethical sacrifice. Yeah, knowing the risks.
Great. Thank you for that.
Everybody, beans now.
Thank you for that overview. No, it's fascinating, and it's important to notice that as well, because that's the first part that you shared, hormesis. That's an aspect that often goes missing, right? So even if we don't think about hormesis in particular, anything, all these organisms have evolved and co-evolved in some way with us. And what I think is important to remember is that no single thing is enough. And in fact, just focusing on one single thing as the panacea, as the silver bullet, can actually be quite harmful. So I'm kind of now not talking scientifically, but just as human beings. Some of it may be supported by scientific evidence. if somebody says, you know what, let's get rid of all the foods and let's live off air. I mean, oxygen is important, but you can't live just off of oxygen. Water is important, but you can't just live off of water. You can't, too much water can give you brain damage. If you just drink way too much water, your brain is going to swell up and you might die from it, right? And we're talking about water. We're not talking about cruciferous vegetables and things like that. So it is very much true. The common spices, if you have too much of nutmeg, I believe that can lead to cardiac arrest or some other complications. Like, it's a household spice. Some of it is good for you. Too much of it can kill you. I think that the key.
I think everybody agrees with that, Balach. Nobody would disagree with that. No reasonable person. Yeah. And
Indeed.
whoever disagrees with that probably shouldn't be watching this show, because that that is the. I think that's the requirement for entry. Yeah. Gotta agree
Indeed.
with that.
And I
Gotta
think
agree with Balach.
it's in the combinations, and as they say, the dose makes the poison, or the dose makes the medicine, right? And that's one aspect of it. And two, it's the combinations. And I think every culture, according to their circumstances, have found their own combinations. Like, that's what I would say about the Inuits and the Maasai, for example. They have their own combination that helps them live well, even if it is meat heavy. They found their combination, it's not that for centuries they were just sitting there and wondering who's going to invent supermarkets and air travel and cargo delivery so that finally we can have tomatoes from Spain. They found their own combinations, and now new options might have improved their diet in certain ways, but also worsened in certain other ways. And that's the combinations we all have to find also for ourselves.
But I have to ask you, so are you are you saying that people people should be eating differently based on their race?
No, based on their needs, and based on their, well, to some extent also based on their race, but not necessarily race more in terms of what their
No,
system
don't
might be
worry.
more primed for.
I was just phrasing it to be controversial.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll put that in the title somewhat, like or just to stir something up. But in all seriousness, I think there are layers to this topic, and I don't mean to pigeonhole you into saying one thing or the other. You said two things, which is that it kind of depends on the individual, and also later on you agreed, to say that, it probably relies on race a bit. And I think you are correct on both counts, actually, because even among, I'm ethnically East Asian, right? And many people around me get flushed, and when they drink alcohol and they feel dizzy. It's very common among East Asians, right?
Yeah.
So it's a thing. And then I'm aware that I think African people, African descent, they have susceptibility to sickle cell anemia, I think, something like that. So it is true, but at the same time, for myself personally, I don't get the Asian flush when I drink alcohol.
That can very well be, right? So that's where this individual, group, etc. comes into picture. And I think to put it in simpler terms, I would say two things. One is we all know about lactose intolerant, right? I think almost half the world population is lactose intolerant, but there's another half or a significant percentage that is not. I'm not lactose intolerant, but I have friends who are. It doesn't make them any better or worse than me or the other way around. And I definitely wouldn't say that somebody who's lactose intolerant now should drink milk.
They should drink it.
Because it's good for them, and the good doctor from 1930s showed that it's great for calcium retention. It just doesn't work that way. So So there might actually be also people who have very clear supplementary needs. The other thing this research showed me is also the variation in terms of what our needs might be. I sort of referred to it earlier. We have the popular food pyramid, the thing that started from US and spread all over the world. And I saw it growing up in Pakistan, right? We had the same freaking pyramid that said you should have a bit of this, a bit of this, a bit of this, a bit of meat, all of those things. And we know that the Maasai are not eating according to that pyramid. The Inuits are not eating according to that pyramid. You have the Native Americans who are not eating according to that pyramid.
Yes, but
You
in all
have...
seriousness, that one's debunked now, isn't it? The food pyramid
Yeah,
thing.
it is. And I think it's important to say that, right? So these kind of templates, you have to take them, like you have to do a bit of your homework. And the reason this needs to be said is because there's so much debate around specific diets, and then there's a lot of anecdotal evidence. And in the age of social media, you have Dr. Peterson coming out and saying, I went carnivorous and it did wonders for me, and now everybody should do it. It's kind of like, come on, take it easy. It worked for you, great. Probably it works for a bunch of people. Maybe it might be not so good for some other people. And I think that what I find interesting, like I have friends from South America and friends of friends who live in the jungle. They have very interesting local diets, majority plant-based, but different from ours. We have access to all sorts of vegetables. They don't. So they have a lot more different leaves and roots that they consume. They also have fish and meat in their diet. Very little, but it exists, and they live very long, healthy lives. Anecdotally speaking, right? I don't have any research to back this up.
Balach, sorry, can we just check if the YouTube connection is still on?
The connection is still on, but I wonder if it might just be the internet connection or the live stream. Maybe we went over an hour for the live stream, did we? Are there any limitations on YouTube lives itself?
No, not on YouTube, but it appears that on YouTube, I'm shown the status that the stream is finished.
So maybe YouTube did that, but we'll get the video and we'll upload it on your YouTube afterwards. So you'll get a higher quality video coming out.
All right.
So no worries at all.
Yeah.
So what I find
in the jungle, right?
Exactly. So you have people there, and from the stories you hear, and the few people that I've seen, they live pretty healthy, robust lives, well into their 80s and 90s. I grew up in Pakistan. I was born in a village. My grandparents lived in the village all their lives. They lived predominantly vegetarian diets, but they had meat from time to time, and they were active to late in their 90s till they died, right? And then they died.
That really, drives home the point that you can eat a variety of ways and still be healthy. So there's absolutely no question about that. I think when we have this debate about vegetarianism, vegetables and meat, I feel like we're approaching it as learning and almost like a sport. I mean, talking about stuff on YouTube is a bit like a sport, a little bit, even though two people are interacting. But the truth is, people can do it any different ways, like they're triathletes who are vegan and so on and so forth. It's just, I guess, the way that we did this discussion, I think, it's the right spirit. We took up a position and we researched it, even in both, for both of us, it's the opposite of our usual position. So, I'm going to give credit to you for that, because it's too, ridiculous to credit myself.
No, credit goes to you as well. I liked doing this research because it also reminded and maybe clarified some more things for me. And, this is why I highlight this kind of, we have the tendency, what I notice is we can get very easily into these one-sided debates, right? So in the research, what I found a lot, there's a lot around dietary needs, right? You need this and this and this and this, and you can only get it from this source. And then, of course, you do some research and you realize, okay, a lot of the things can be gotten from other sources as well. Maybe you need to eat more or less of the alternatives, or you can supplement nowadays. I think the aspect that doesn't get talked about, which came up also in this blue zone diet, is all these people who live long and healthy lives, especially in these blue zones, have wonderful communities around them. They have good relationships. And that's another aspect of the research that, we often forget when we talk about diet. We kind of think of it as a machine. You have a gear that's creaking and you just need to add a bit more lubricant and then it's fine. Cool. But if you have all the gears around it that are also creaking or about on the verge of breakdown, no amount of lubricant in one corner is going to prevent the machine from breaking down. And I think that the social structure actually is a big contributor when it comes to longevity and also general health.
Yeah, but then we'd be, stepping way outside
Yeah, absolutely.
our
So,
bounds for today.
no, absolutely.
I have heard
Just
of
wanted to throw that in.
Oh, yes, thank you. The blue zone stuff is really interesting, and actually, I was really interested. I remember Icaria. I remember specifically Icaria because they interviewed this 100-year-old man who, was still smoking, and he said he wanted to take a younger wife, and when he said younger, he meant like 80 years old. It was amazing. That I forgot where I read that, probably the New York Times or Atlantic or something like that. And then more recently, and I just want to say this, but I don't want to argue about it. There are some people who wrote that, okay, really, this Blue Zones book has a huge problem, which is that these places where the claims are coming from have poor record keeping. So we can't trust the claims of the locals who say, I'm 110 years old. Like you just don't have a good record. And when I read that, actually it just clicked in my mind that that's kind of obviously true, because if you can't have reliable records, nothing else, can be taken at face value. I sort of dropped my interest in it. But
Yeah,
may I ask you? I want to ask this about. Very interested about vegetarianism on this topic. So that a lot of people are going for low carb diets now, right? Do you personally know anybody who's doing low carb vegetarian?
I do know a few people, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Because I'm really so interested in that. Like, there was a short time, like just a couple of years, I was doing vegetarian. I ate eggs, just no meat, no fish. And I found it next to impossible to and I wanted to do it low carb, and I found it next to impossible. Like I just could not eat enough stuff, if I didn't eat carbohydrates in one way or another.
It's very interesting. So these days I'm actually, I might do a proper low carb diet for a few weeks, and I will let you know from personal experience.
Impossible.
I have no idea. So one of the things I've noticed the last 3-4 weeks, I've made some changes to my diet actually. So I'm a vegetarian. I do eat cheese and eggs from time to time. So let's say maybe once or twice a week. So that's my protocol. And then coffee with normal cow milk, also maybe once a week. So normally I drink my coffee black. So that's the amount of my dairy intake. No other meats, no fish. And this is how it has been for a long time. However, I do have a lot of carbohydrates in my food. So growing up in Pakistan or South Asia in general, with every meal you have bread or rice. In fact, when I came to Germany, I found it awkward that my European friends were happy to just eat the lentil stew and not touch the bread. And for me, that was not a complete meal, right? I found it crazy. Or they would eat the vegetables but leave the rice aside. And for me, that was important. And what I did in the last few weeks is I added a bit more workouts. So I've been working out every day. And then I listened to a podcast by Andrew Huberman, and there was one simple thing they mentioned, which was that when people work out, their body's ability, their brain's ability to listen to and respond to the satiety signals increases. So there was this discussion around exercise for weight loss or food control. And it seems that you don't lose weight because you eat less. You lose weight because the exercise allows you to realize faster that you have eaten enough. And so you just eat what is appropriate for you, what your body says is appropriate for you.
I can really feel that. I can imagine that going way off way off base though, because I finished I finished eating. I decided to do some light exercise. Maybe I'll do it and I'll keep doing it for a bit. Maybe I sweat a little, and then I call it a day. Let's say 30 to 40 minutes workout. I'm done. Go have a break. And then the hunger pangs come back later because I never ate enough. And now, the workout postponed my hunger. Because I remember that when you're working out, you don't feel hungry.
Yeah.
It's only, substantially after that when you had a rest, you're rested, you're hydrated, you're sitting on the sofa, you're relaxed, you had a shower, and then it hits you.
It's interesting. So the change that happened for me was that I naturally experienced what Huberman was talking about. And now for the last 4 weeks, I have not had any, it wasn't a 2-day experience and I have gone back. It has stayed with me that I naturally started to eat a bit less on the normal meals that I eat. And 2, I have not had the need to eat between meals. So before I was eating between meals, I would go to the kitchen, I would eat some nuts, or I would feel hungry and I would take a bit of a fruit or take a toast and put something on it. And the exercise definitely, this is the only variable that has changed, has made me not eat between meals. And I am definitely eating a bit less at meals without forcing myself. So this has happened naturally. So that was very interesting for me, that didn't happen.
So are you going for some weight loss? Is that what you were aiming to get?
Yes, I want to reduce a bit of fat around my belly, to be very specific.
How's that going?
It seems to be working. So I do notice the difference as well. I think in terms of weight loss, I've maybe lost a couple 100 grams, so nothing significant on the scale. It's still, I weigh 67 kilos. So, yesterday it showed around 66.8. I don't think that is a significant difference, but I feel different in my body. I do feel that I feel a bit lighter in my body. And of course, there's the muscle gain and metabolism, and all of those things come into the picture as well.
That I was going to ask you about next. Like, do you observe or feel any muscle gain? Because that's something I'm trying to do also, like get more muscle gain. Yeah.
I do. Although I would say, like I've seen a lot of those videos, and at some point in my past, I was one of those guys. You do 20 push-ups and then you check your biceps. But of course, you don't grow biceps from 20 push-ups in one day.
Yeah, it should be
100. Or you will notice the sweating. But so this is literally, it's been 4 weeks, and today would be the first day of the 5th week of this routine. The exercise that I'm doing is started with like literally 5 minutes of shadow boxing, and now it's around 20 to 30 minutes. I just added pull-ups. I'm happy to announce that I can do 5 pull-ups. And the first time I tried it, I could barely do 2. So there's difference in strength. and I do start noticing a bit of muscle buildup. But I think that's really the difference you notice. When you start from zero, you see the biggest gains pretty fast, and then you plateau. And going from 0 to 15 is perhaps easy and fast, and then 15 to 20 is what takes a bit longer.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been really interesting. And I eat twice a day. I don't eat 3 times. And I naturally got into this kind of intermittent fasting thing. So I skip the breakfast and I eat around 11, 12 p.m. and then later dinner.
Yeah.
So I think like my personal experience, basically, to again also put it together with what we were discussing, is our bodies as human beings, we are incredibly adaptable animals, right? Like we can eat all sorts of food and food combinations. I don't think any other animal has that capability. And then within that is based on our goals, based on our activity levels, based on our stress levels, we would see different results as well. And then there are certain general trends that hold across the population. But there's a lot of individual variety as well that we can definitely play with. I found some maybe I'll share the link, or just for a second I'll share the screen. One of the interesting things I noticed while I was doing this research was this diagram, and this is part of a study that I will quickly show as well. And this shows the prevalence of coronary heart disease, colon cancer, prostate cancer, breast cancer, males and females. Okinawa is the black bar, Japan is the white bar, and US is the dashed or lined bar. Mm-hmm. And you can see that Okinawa beats Japan and US hands down across all of these diseases. Mm-hmm. And Okinawa is one of the blue zones, and I assumed that we know that they have meat and fish in their diet, but then I looked deeper into this, and I will share this full study link now for our show notes. And what surprised me in this chart is it shows the relative number of calories they were eating. So there was one conclusion that they have caloric restriction naturally. These people are not trying to diet, but they eat a bit less in general.
You just can't. Sorry, I just had to jump in just to say, I think the calorie restriction thing needs to be clarified a little, because if your body, you have a basal metabolic rate, right? Mm-hmm. And if you consistently eat less than your basal metabolic rate, you'll just eventually shrivel up.
Mm-hmm.
You'll dry up. So
yeah,
can you provide some context, so like people listening, they can understand, like, what do you mean, Balach? Because I understand if you say, like, on any given day, perhaps I eat less than calories than I actually need on a given day. But can I actually do that for like the rest of my life?
It's a really good point. I think the answer to that is, as you said, no, right? So if your body needs 2,000 calories and you're consistently eating 1,600, you're going to get into a deficit. So when people talk about caloric restriction, there's 2 ways to look at it. When it's a comparison across populations, it really is a relative measure that says Okinawans tend to eat less than Japanese, or their total caloric intake is less than Japanese, but it is the appropriate caloric intake for that population, for the Okinawans. It's not that they are, fasting all the time. What this, and then on an individual level, this might be me doing a bit of intermittent fasting, or having a day of fasting and having that kind of caloric restriction. Let's say I do a fast 1 day a week. And so that would be my caloric restriction, which is still within the healthy zone, and it promotes autophagy, the cleanup of debris and dead cells from the system, that can help with recovery as well. Fasting tends to, in some studies, it's shown that it helps against cancer growth as well, because it gives the body a bit more space for cleaning out dead cells. So yeah, caloric restriction, don't take it as face value. If your body needs, if you are, 6 feet, 300 pounds, you probably need 4 or 5,000 calories, whereas me being, a lot smaller and a lot less heavy, I would probably need a lot less.
Yeah.
So don't take it for face value. Just see in what context that is being presented in. What was interesting here was because they actually tried to list down where these calories were coming from. And what I found really crazy interesting here is if you look at kind of rice and other grain consumption, the Okinawans eat a bit less of that compared to Japanese. They have less sugars. It's a huge difference, but they have more legumes, which I did not, assume before. They actually eat less fish than the rest of Japan. So if you look at the fish column, it's 15 versus 62, like 4 times less meat, less eggs, less dairy, more vegetables.
More sweet potatoes, actually.
More sweet potatoes. Like sweet potatoes is huge, right? It's like more than 10 times.
Yeah. They eat less other vegetables than the other Japanese.
Indeed. And so this was, and of course, this is old data, not going into how that has changed now. I think there was some interesting video somebody did where they gave a McDonald's cheeseburger to some Okinawan old man, and he had a bite, and his expression was, "It feels like I died and went to heaven." Just that rush of processed food was felt so clearly by this person. It's like taking a hit of some potent drug or something. So there were some really interesting findings in this research, and I think people should look into a bit of that and see what works for them, what works for people they know, how it works. If we just take grains, or if we just take meat, or if we just take legumes, it's an incomplete case to say this is the thing. It's always in the combination, and then also local adaptations probably play a big role. So yeah, I think that the one thing I do want to add related to our whole discussion, like I said, I think we are omnivorous species, and then depending on your preferences and desires and wishes, you can eat whatever you like as long as it works for you and you feel healthy. I think that's the best outcome. The one thing that I've still find in me against meat is really literally just the factory farming. That's the only thing that I don't like. Like I realized that there was I couldn't find an argument for that. I've came to the acceptance of people eating meat. I don't think I will ever switch to that personally. But I think a connection to the land, a connection to your food sources. When you go from that point of view, when you eat with gratitude, like this is maybe the philosophical aspect of it. I mean, we are this very interesting species, and we don't know what other life forms exist out in the universe. We don't know if there's any others in this galaxy. Definitely doesn't seem to be any other in the solar system. We're pretty unique, and we are a product of the combination of the circumstances on this planet. And the food we eat comes out of the same source as us. And I think if we think in those terms, maybe we'll have a healthy relationship to what we consume, and that it wouldn't be this machine-like of let's add 10 more grams of legumes and 20 more grams of meat and 30 grams of lion's mane mushroom so we can function optimally like a machine. I think it's an ecosystem, and that has produced some unique combinations over the world.
I agree. I think the main thing that I took away from what you said is the opposition to the factory farming. I think everybody hates that. Like, I think even your most ardent meat lover they wouldn't want to see a factory farm either. I think everybody is in agreement on that. Um, in fact, we should take it further. To me, I think we should take it further. We should be talking about depletion of soil. I've been visiting Indonesia for work, and I've heard, from people there that soil depletion is a real problem. There are actually incentives for farmers in Indonesia to use organic fertilizer, chicken poop, cow poop. But they have actually gotten used to using chemical fertilizer, and it's just ingrained, and it's been difficult to change their view, that you can achieve a similar yield, or in that if you do your organics really properly, you fetch a higher price, right? You could sell it for a higher price. And that recognition and that knowledge has not yet taken root, but soil depletion is real. So I was told that in some places, farmers, if you before you start a new planting season, you loosen the soil, I don't know what you call that device, but you would turn the soil over, dig it up. And right now they have to go deeper and deeper, as deep as a meter, I'm told.
Oh, wow.
That sounds really deep to me, because I was thinking normally, in my mental picture, as you prepare for a new planting season, you just kind of flip the soil right around the surface, right? There'll be some tractor doing it even. But now I'm told that, you have to go up to a meter deep in some cases, because the topsoil is just too poor. And
Yeah, it's incredible. The traditional mechanical plows, whether it was horses or bulls or the tractor, is usually 1 foot, 1.5 foot, but going up to a meter, that's crazy.
Yes, and the thing that I think is invisible is that this is a consequence of unregulated, unrestricted plant agriculture. It's not cows, right? So all the negative energy is being focused on the meat, and I think that suits the industrial scale farms that are allowing this kind of harm to take place. Now, I'm cynical enough, a little cynical, to think that, if I were in their position, I'm a very successful agricultural company, I might put some money, put some PR effort into continuing to make sure that the meat industry is front and center of everyone's attention. In the meantime, large parts of the countryside, the soil is poor and nothing grows, and nobody's looking at that, so we'll just continue as is, and everybody doesn't realize. So there is, I think, opportunity for people to take more notice, not just to notice only the things that we're told. Yeah.
No, I completely agree.
That little paradigm a little.
Absolutely. Monocultures are a big, like very clear case of this. But it doesn't just have to be monoculture. It's the same also when people just grow 1 or 2 crops and they try to do it in, let's say, there was an interesting phrase I had, borrowing happiness from tomorrow, or in a way, this is borrowing profits from tomorrow. Let's use whatever fertilizers, whatever chemicals we can to get the best yield possible today, but then the soil degrades and then you're left with infertile soil, and 3 years down the line, you can't grow anything there. So this can happen in normal farming as well, with chemicals or unsustainable practices. Monocultures really make that front and center. And it's the same with meat factory farming when it really is just kind of one specific load on earth.
They have different set of problems. You can't equate them.
Well, yeah, but in terms of
cows is good for the soil, but
grazing cows is good for the soil. But let me just share one image, that for me was the. Let's just do this. So this is how most factory farms look like. And this is a cleaner image, the one that I've selected on the right, right? There's when you see the anti-meat documentaries, you see much worse images, right? Because obviously people want to add a bit of drama to that and, evoke emotions. This looks like a bunch of cows happily eating green grass. But this is how most factory farms are. They're not grazing grass off the land. And to me,
That's not. I don't think that's a factory farm, man. Factory farms are the ones where they're kept in a steel cage and they can't move. They can't turn around even. That's you just stand there. You just sit or you stand. That's a factory farm kind.
I agree. So something a bit like this. But the reason I chose this image, and I because I don't want to necessarily go into that kind of meat production is just the bane or the devil's work in that sense. But even this, a normal cow doesn't just stand in one place and move her neck to eat.
Yeah, but this particular picture, sorry, Balach, I just have to take issue with this. The cameraman shows this angle so that you can't see how much space, if any, there is behind the cow. Because as you can see, there's a additional structure behind the cows. Like they may actually be able to walk away from this trough that they're feeding in,
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely. They might have paved roads and cars in which they drive to their feeding grounds. What this image shows to me, honestly, this is to me the image of, in a way, this is slavery. This is animal slavery. It's kind of saying when prisoners get their food in jail cells, that is a healthy environment for them to live in. No human being sits and moves within 3 by 3 meters, and no cow herd stands in line to eat. And I think what I'm basically saying with this is kind of when we use land for specialized purposes, there is some land degradation in that process. Now, it might be worse, or like in the case of monocultures, it's worse. There's in all the evidence that shows that, because you're putting in the same chemicals, growing the same crops, and eventually the soil becomes infertile. I think it's the richness of the ecosystem from which good things come out, and that lack of richness is what hurts us. I think the case can be made for diet as well. The case can be made for land use. Maybe that could be another episode about land use and so on. But it's that forcing the environment to produce certain specific yields is, to me, borrowing happiness from tomorrow. We get a bit more boost today, but we will probably end up poorer in the near future.
That's a difficult thing to respond to. I mean, nobody wants to see factory farms, and yes, I think everybody would love to see the old type of farm where you have, on the same farm, you have crops being grown, there's rotation of the crops, and you also have farm animals because, a farm typically has farm animals as well as crops. And I think everybody loves that, right? Because the animals and the crops kind of support each other. One is food, the other, provides fertilizer, and yeah, that just resonates with us, as human beings on a basic level. And then there's no divergence there at that level, between people who eat all the meat in the world and people who eat only vegetables. I think on that there's total agreement. I think the cleavages, the differences of opinion only occur further down the road. Like what kind of sacrifices are you willing to accept? What level of horrors are you willing to accept in order to support a growing population, or a certain lifestyle, good quality of life? Yeah, and I think that's further down the road is where people diverge. But everybody, yeah, everybody agrees on, having a clean farm with different all kinds of different uses. Yeah, I think on that at least that's a good thing, and I think we all on the same side on that. Yeah, that's a very nice point about, I think, our conversations, because uh, I get to hear your side, and then we get to identify uh, where the common grounds between like different world views, different viewpoints are. Because if you can't identify a common ground, there's no way to move forward. So we got to identify these. And yeah, nobody wants factory farms. Everybody wants the more traditional kind of farms. Best, would be uh, more locally sourced kind of food supply. I think that would be the best for everybody concerned. Yeah, yeah. So rest easy, Balach. I think on this at least, nobody is on a different track from that. Uh, I, I would not believe, could not believe that I would find somebody who would be like, pro factory farm. Yeah, but pro, yeah, uh, humane animal treatment. Yeah, definitely, definitely.
Well,
And
here's
if that's the main, contention, the main issue, at play here for you, yeah, there might yet be a day when you could enjoy a steak. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, like the factory farm phenomenon is American phenomenon. It's not so much. It's not a European issue. It's not a European problem, and it's not yeah, it's not like a Japanese problem. Like Japan also produces lots of cows, Australia as well, and I know that, yeah, Australians in general are also very environmentally aware, socially conscious people. They wouldn't accept that either. Is my hunch. Although I may be wrong, I think, yeah, most of the world is in agreement on this. Yeah, maybe you can visit a nice Japanese farm where they have these cows that get massages and beer, and then yeah, there you can enjoy a steak. You'd be like, ah, yeah, that looks those cows look like they lived a good life, no regrets. Okay, fine.
yeah, no, it's well, I hope more and more of that happens. I think when we are connected with other beings around us, it is harder to abuse them. It's kind of like that. That's how I view it. And if we find that connection, we will also find solutions. Even it's like I said, if eating meat is somebody's thing, then that is their thing. I don't know if we ever had these discussions when I was in Singapore, but when people used to ask me, so what's your thing against meat? Because nowadays the discussions are a lot more nuanced, but back then people used to be this or that, right? And I used to say, hey, if you go out and hunt your own animal and you're not allowed to use crazy new age weapons where you can just sit in your shelter and shoot the fuck out of whatever you see at a distance, then please go ahead, enjoy it. If you have at least that proximity, my assumption is that people would not be abusing these systems. I don't think I have anything against people's consumption. It's when we are disconnected, we tend to not know what's happening. We the problem is somewhere else. The problem is out of our sight. And that's where all sorts of abuses can happen. But if people are more connected to what they're consuming, they will, as you say, nobody will see animal abuse and back it up just because they want to eat meat. I think people are much more sensible than that. It's just that we don't see that often enough. So I hope more people would visit the Japanese farms, and I think they would have a different feeding, and they would have at least a different connection with their food, I guess I take the avatar version of being in connection with nature, you know, like at least we have a movie where you see if you're going to kill it, at least say thanks, and then try to consume as much as possible of that, and try to give back to the system as well. And then it's going to be all fine.
No disagreement there.
Awesome.
All right. How long have we gone on already, Balach?
I think we are at 1 hour 45 minutes.
Wow. Time flies.
Time flies, and there's a lot still that can be said about all these things. So, as always, a big pleasure talking to you. Thank you for having me on your YouTube, and thank you for being on my podcast. I look forward to the next one.
Likewise, always a pleasure. Thanks, Balach. And thanks to our audience who will be, if not listening live, will be listening later. Thanks, everyone.
Ciao.
We'll be back again next week, and we don't know yet what the topic will be, but we will figure it out.
Absolutely. Ciao.
All right.